Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast, sponsored by the IBCA. We are a global podcast that shares the passion for the coaching profession. You will hear the stories of coaches from all around the world. We are covering the profession in game, outside of the game, and anything in between. As always, thank you for listening. We look forward to sharing the coaches' stories with you. All right, on this episode of the After the Timeout podcast, we have Will Benson, the new head boys basketball coach at Stevenson High School. Coach, how you doing this morning?
Good. How are you guys doing?
We're doing well. We want to start off. We kind of start off with everyone, kind of talking about their journey, and we're gonna really dig into your journey actually a little bit later when we talk about growing your career. But if you just want to take our listeners through a little bit of your journey, how you got to where you are, and then maybe just a little bit about Stevenson basketball.
Yeah, so I got hired at Harvard High School like the 3 days before school started. I was actually looking at other professions just because it was so late. And we had I was married, and we had our oldest daughter, in May, and this was August, and I didn't have a job. So my mom actually found on the McHenry County ROE Regional Office of Education website that Harvard had a PE position. And so I was really, really lucky that I knew my former high school coach, knew the AD there, who was also the head football coach and the head wrestling coach, one of my mentors, Tim Hack. And, we left him a voicemail, and they brought me in for an interview. And I was very lucky because they were looking for a female that could teach health. And I was a male that could not teach health at the time. That they, again, another lucky part of it was they were transitioning health from a 9th grade curriculum to a 10th grade curriculum. So they didn't really have health that whole year. Kids had already taken it. And so I co-taught like a class of health that kids were taking for the second time. And it was a small school, so I could get my health certificate during that first year. And I was there for 6 years. I loved it. I mean, it was a small school, and I drove 45 minutes, but I have, like I said, Tim Hack is one of my mentors, and I felt like I got in 6 years, like 25 years of coaching and teaching clinic every day, in coaching football for him. And, a little bit of softball, which I kind of mentioned. And then I, became the head basketball coach there my second year. So that was, even though it was small and even though we weren't very good, I learned a ton there. And then I kept teaching there when I helped out at Jacobs. I helped out Jim Hinkle's last year. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Coach Hinkle at all. My wife taught there at the time, so I kind of had an in, and we kind of lived near there. So I was the sophomore coach. I was going to help him anyway. It ended up being his last year, which that was not the plan for him initially when I kind of signed in or signed up over the summer. And it was funny because I was interviewing for that head position the same time I interviewed for the Marengo head position. Hinkle actually called me on my way to Marengo to an interview, and I didn't know where I was at in the Jacobs process. I knew that I think at the time I was in the final 3. And Hinkle called me, and he goes, "Listen, you need to go for this Marengo position really hard because I don't think you're getting this Jacobs head position." And I was like, okay. And that was literally on my drive there. And I was fortunate. I knew the Marengo, the people and the kids, because Harvard was in the same conference, and I had been a year away as a head coach at that point. And so I got that job there. It was great. I had a blast. Would have stayed if I was teaching there. It was hard teaching out of the building and being a head coach. I had great assistants. I've been fortunate to have great assistants everywhere, but especially there. And then, I knew if Huntley ever opened, I was going to go for it because I lived in the district, and we were, my oldest was a kindergartner. So my wife and I were parents in the district before, I worked there. So I really liked it from an education standpoint and what the district was trying to do. Had no plans to leave Huntley ever, really. And then the last handful of years, as I've met with a bunch of coaches individually, just in the off season to kind of pick their brains, especially when we were struggling, which there was a lot of struggle my first 4 years at Huntley, and to try to pick people's brains. And Pat Ambrose was one of them. And, then I started following Stevenson from a distance. And, I just was one of those positions where I was like, if that ever opened, I feel like I have to give it a shot. And because close enough, or we wouldn't have to move, right away, and very prestigious academically, obviously, and athletically. And, I just was really fortunate that to land there, and the people there have been great. So in terms of Stevenson basketball, we have a little more size than I'm used to. We had some great players at Huntley, but not a ton of size. And so we'll probably have two of the three 6'8", 6'6", 6'5" on the floor almost every moment, I would imagine. And so I'm not used to that. So I'm doing my homework on what to do with some of that size. I think we have a chance to be good. There's no question. Pat did not leave. Obviously, Hall of Fame guy, 500 plus wins, less than 200 losses, state championship, 3 other trips there. He did not leave the cupboard bare. But there's a lot of little things that, as you coach and you watch your team play over the summer, you're like, gosh, we don't do any little things very well. And because it's summer, and that's kind of where I feel. So, and we have a tough Thanksgiving tournament right off the bat. We're going to play Hersey and Jacobs and Glenbrook South and York. So right off the bat, we're going to see a lot of different defenses, a lot of different styles, very good coaches. And so we're going to have to be ready in 12 days like everybody else. But there's not a team where you feel like you can just show up and beat. Not that happens very often, but sometimes at Thanksgiving, you get a situation where you feel like you can beat a team. And I don't think we have that feeling going into our Thanksgiving tournament at Palatine. So yeah.
I'm pretty sure everybody's gonna just turn it off after you said you had 6'8", 6'8", 6'7". I don't know.
I'm sandbagging. I'm not sandbagging, I promise you.
All right, so I want to talk about your first year. You were 9-19 your first year as a head coach. So I want to talk personally and then basketball wise. So during that time, what did you learn about yourself?
Gosh, I mean, like my head was spinning the entire year. I mean, it was even 2 weeks after the season. I think my first 2 years, 2 weeks after the season ended, I was like, what am I not doing right now? I feel like I should be doing something. And I was 26, I think, at the time. And, they had only won, I think, 4 games the previous year and 2 the previous year of that. And so I felt like with the schedule we played, I thought we got a lot out of the kids. Now looking back on it, out of the 3 years I was a head coach at Harvard, that was probably my most talented team there. And of course, I wish I would have done things differently. I mean, I used to be a set guy. I used to be a John Beeline 2-3 high set guy. And now we run, all motion. I've completely flipped for lots of reasons I'm sure we'll get into later. But personally, I felt like, we had a good assistant with me. Of course, there we had 3 stipends, a freshman coach, a sophomore coach, and me. So our sophomore and varsity, we practiced together numbers wise. So like our best sophomores combined with our kind of JV type kids for like the scout group. And felt like that had a nice continuity to it. Being in a smaller school, your depth is kind of your sophomore level at the time, I would say. And so what did I learn? I don't know. I mean, everything. And I felt like, we spent a lot more time on sets back then. I mean, in the summer, we went 6 a.m. to 8:30 for 20 days and barely played any games because I was trying to get them better through practice and not discourage them by losing a bunch of games over the summer. That's where we were at my first year. So I mean, it was a crazy experience. A lot of good coaches in that league at that time. So I don't know. I mean, like I said, it was such a blur the whole season. I felt like I was trying to be a week ahead from a scheduling standpoint, and then all of a sudden it was over. But we had some good kids. I probably one of my favorite outcomes that year was Hampshire really, really crushed us at home by like 30 something. This was before the running clock, so we had to sit through the whole thing in the fourth quarter, getting pumped by 35. 8 days later, we went to their place and beat them by 2. So that was a crazy, and it was just, I think they took us lightly. We played well and they missed shots and we kind of scored at the end. So that was one of my favorite wins from that year, even though there weren't that many of them.
So now let's go basketball wise. What are some of the things that you thought you needed to change and needed to keep? And then how did you go about that process of kind of making those decisions?
Yeah, I think philosophically I'm similar. Overall, just in terms of, the physicality of the game and we want to be, solid defensively and rebounding and we want to share the ball. But I think when you're running a bunch of sets and you run a bunch of sets for the same 1 or 2 guys, and I certainly understand that, especially if you only have 1 or 2 guys that can score, you can say that you're preaching team, but in the back of kids' minds, I feel like they might be like, well, we're preaching team, but we're trying to get this one kid 25 shots and the next kid, 8 shots. So I think the motion offense, we had to switch to it when I got to Huntley. We were not overly talented, and I did not do a great job my first few years there in general, just from an X's and O's standpoint. And so I felt like we kept playing, Rockford teams in the regional. That's where we are geographically. And it was just hard to run sets because I just couldn't tell you if those guys were going to switch in their man or if they weren't going to switch. They kind of did whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. So I felt like the motion was something that our 2 assistants really were behind. And I was like, okay, at that point we were grasping for straws. I mean, at least I was. We weren't very good. Weren't winning a bunch of games. And so when we switched to the motion stuff, I felt like we could, read defense a little bit better and be a little bit less predictable. Obviously, there's a lot of coaches in our area that do a great job scouting. So the motion's a little bit harder to scout just because, it's a little bit more free flowing within a structure. And so that was really the main reason we went to that motion stuff, and completely flipped. I mean, I used to call set every time down the floor. And I don't even think I'm smart enough to do that anymore. I think I've gotten too old. I wouldn't be able to remember all the sets that we used to run. So it's completely changed from an X's and O's standpoint for sure. And, it's been great. We've had some success. Obviously we've had really good players, so that's helped a lot too.
So, okay, let's talk about that a little bit more then. You went from being set oriented to motion. How did you go about kind of changing that style, right? Because that's a big difference. Right now you got your players are learning, oh, well, I should be here. But now we're kind of making those reads and making decisions on their own. So what was your process to kind of change that learning, I guess, and kind of teach them that basketball?
Well, I was learning with them. Honestly, the 2 assistants put it in, and then I was kind of learning as we went. And that first year it took me a while to figure out how to teach it or to make adjustments to it. That was the biggest thing for me. The basic stuff is basic, our principles are basic, but when teams take away certain things, now we got to do some things. Actually, another reason why we switched to it is at the time, Jacobs had Cameron Crutwig, if you remember that name. And they switched a lot of stuff 1 through 4, and they were really good defensively, especially. And they had a 4-year run where they were really, really good. And they made a super one of those years. And so we were like, how do we beat these guys? And so we just can't score on them. It just was really hard. So that was another reason why we switched to it too. I learned honestly through trial and error, and then through film, and then through, okay, this team's taking us this away. So now, there are teams that can do things to us in the 5-out, but not too much that we haven't seen now at that point, because we've been doing it for 5 years. So now at least I have the adjustment to the adjustment ready. Everybody goes through that. And the sets, obviously all of our sets had counters, but I think it's a little bit easier for kids to play in that and to drive with that spacing. And I've always been a 3-point guy, which is funny because I was not a good 3-point shooter, but I've always liked our team to shoot threes. So that was one of the principles of Beeline back in the day that I liked. It was like I felt like those West Virginia teams were shooting layups or threes. And I felt like that was really the way the game was kind of going. And so, I learned, honestly, I learned with the kids. I learned from our assistants. I learned through film work and just trying to figure it out. And again, as teams started to take certain things away, this is funny you say that, because this was the first year at Stevenson that I've ever taught it from the ground up. I had never taught it from the ground up because our assistants taught it from the ground up, and then we just kind of kept it going.
So speaking of ground up, let's talk about Huntley a little bit. So at Huntley, you started 32 and 85, but after that, all of a sudden it was 104 and 43, which is incredible. So before we kind of talk about the turnaround process, how did you know during those first few years, how did you know to stay the course? What did you kind of do during those tough moments for yourself and your kids to kind of just continue to keep everyone focused?
It was really hard. I'm really process driven. I mean, I'm a Belichick guy. I'm a Saban guy. I think that anybody that you talk to and you listen to coaches and read things and watch certain things, and I think that the best ones are process driven. So the outcome part of it for the kids, I don't think was ever. I mean, it was tough. Obviously, we lost a bunch of games. And I wasn't sure, truthfully, I was sweating that year 4 end of season meeting with our AD, to be quite honest with you, because I knew that was that sophomore group that we had, and 3 of them were up with the varsity. Whoever had the job next year was going to win some games, just because we finally had some good kids coming in, and we kind of figured some things out with the 5 out and scheme wise. And so I was like, man, if I can just get through this one, I feel like we can win enough games where I'm not going to get let go, next year but I was really sweating that meeting, truthfully. And so our assistants were awesome. If I'd have lost our assistants during that time, that would have been, I don't know that I would have stuck with it, because our assistants are so good, and they're good friends of mine, that it would have been really challenging. So those guys support that we were doing the right things from a program standpoint, even though we changed a lot of X's and O's. I felt like, thankfully, obviously my support system there was great. My wife and kids were great. I tell you, the one thing that came about positive that came about that for me was, I couldn't really get very emotional in that time, because we were not winning a lot of games. So whenever it came down to like the end of the game situations, or big timeout or drawn up stuff, I was kind of, and this is going to sound bad, I was a little bit numb to the outcome, because we had lost so many games. It really taught me to slow my mind down and to really concentrate on communicating what we wanted to do in those big moments, end of game moments, where sometimes we can get nervous and think a little bit less clear. So it really let me think more clearly and slow my mind down and remove a lot of the emotion that can kind of block what you're trying to do. You know what I mean? And so that was a big positive that came out of it, that I've taken with me. And that sophomore group that won 6 games, the 3 guys that were up as sophomores at the varsity, and then won 27 games their senior year, and a regional at home. It was like, that was probably one of the most nervous I ever was that regional championship at home against Jefferson, and won 25 or 26 games. I just felt like those seniors deserved to win it. They had come so far, and they had dragged our program from the depths of what you said, which was not good, not in a good spot wins wise, to the regional championship. And then, a double or triple overtime game against Cary in the sectional right before COVID shut everything down. They deserved it, and it was awesome. So it was hard, but the support system between our assistant coaches and my family is what kind of got us through. And we had good kids. We just didn't have super talented kids at the time. And then, like I said, I had to learn a lot and change things too. So it was a combination of things, but the support system is really what got me through.
So just as an interesting follow, because I've, in the last year or two, tried to really study and try to be more process oriented, but, something Todd and I talk about all the time, as major college sports becomes more professionalized, the high school sports realm seems to be getting greater and greater pressure and greater results oriented. I think, 10, 12, 15, 20 years ago, the coaches could stay somewhere for 40 years, regardless of results. But I don't know if it is like that now, with parental pressure, administrative pressure, pressure to win, things like that. So how do you, as a coach, what would you say to coaches that are listening to, yes, balance being that process oriented coach, but also some people may say, I need to win to save my job?
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough balance. I guess I would say that the outcome is going to be what it is no matter what. So as long as you're staying the course of what you think the best process is, and obviously everybody's situation is different, I think you can at least lay your head on the pillow at night and be okay with the results. That's kind of the way I look at it. I will tell the kids when I make a mistake, I shouldn't have done that, because accountability starts with me. And every time we lose a game by 1 possession, I say that's on me, because it's a player's game. But in a 1 possession game, a coach can make a decision that can affect the outcome in a 1 possession game, in my mind, unless you're, down 6 and you hit a 3 at the buzzer and it ends up being 3, it's something like that. But if it's 1, 2, or 3 and it comes down to the last possession, I will wear that every single time, because there's something we could have done as a staff that could have changed the outcome. Other than that, as long as you feel like you're doing what's best for kids, none of us are perfect. We're all going to make mistakes, but if the effort is there, I think in the film work and the practice and prep and those things, I think you just got to live with the results, and that's easier said than done. But I don't know if it's because I've studied so much of some of those process oriented coaches I mentioned, or if it's because we've lost so much at Harvard and Huntley that I had to be process oriented. Otherwise I would have gone crazy with the outcomes, but it's been okay with the way I look at it in terms of the process, but I certainly understand why it's harder for some people. There's no question about that.
I'm gonna follow again on that. Let's talk about the kids and the process, right? Because we look at today, it's a lot of instant gratification. There's social media. There's different factors than when we were playing and growing up. So how do you talk with the kids about that process and kind of getting them to buy into that, even though it might not be going as well as you wanted at the time?
I think it's just talk about it every day. You just hammer it into them. And I think that you also have to demonstrate that by your own personal behavior. If you play really, really well and a team that's better than you wins, I mean, I wouldn't fly off the handle in the locker room afterwards because of that. I think, the same point, if you play a team that you're better than and you don't play well and you win, you got to point that out too. So I think it's always just being consistent with that message on a daily basis, and then modeling that in the locker room during halftime, before the game and after the game, because that once they see that you're living by that, and that's how we're going to live every day. Like if you get a great shot and you miss a wide open three from a kid that's a great shot for, okay, or you miss a layup, kid's not trying to miss a layup, it just happens. So I think you got to live that every day. And then the kids buy in because oh, coach isn't going to be mad at me for missing the shot. No, it's a great shot. It didn't go in. Great shooters are going to miss 6 out of 10 threes. So I think modeling that and living that and preaching that every day, then the kids will buy in after that. At least the places I've been, the kids will buy in. We've had good kids everywhere that I've been fortunate there.
All right, so let's move into, you've been in different communities, some with similar traits, some with different. So when you're coming into the program and working with the parents and kind of preaching your message and and building that process, how do you build those bridges between the players, parents, and yourself?
Again, my mentor at Harvard was tremendous. He would always say something along the lines of, your parents want what's best for you. They should. You're their kid. That's their job. But we got to do what's best for the team. And, your parents' ideas on playing time and those things are no different than me telling you what party you can go to and can't go to and what movie you can go see and what you can't see. That's not my role. I use this example a couple times a year. I love my wife. We've been married 17 and a half years. We got married young. She's wonderful. And I listen to her when we talk, but her role is not to be our assistant coach. Her role is to, be supportive, and she always is. She's awesome. But my point is, when I use my wife as an example of someone that I love and loves me, but I'm not going to take everything she says and bring it to our team. No different than the kids need to understand the message that we're preaching. We're with them 2-3 hours a day, for several months, including the summer. So we're going to do what's best for our group, and we're going to listen to the kids for sure. But I'm not interested in what outside people think. And he was really good at preaching that and not fracturing, having the locker room not fractured. So we talk about that, especially after tough losses, that happen. I think once you preach that over and over and, the kids have a voice. There's no question about that. And so we care what they think, but I'm not interested in what people who aren't in our locker room or in our practice every day think. That's just, and I learned that from him, and he was great at it.
So you kind of talked about your experiences a little bit. You touched on softball and football, but Todd and I are always interested what coaches learn by coaching other sports or different experiences in your life. So maybe take us through something you learned from coaching softball or something you learned from coaching football that's helped you grow as a basketball coach.
Well, I've been around quite a few Hall of Fame coaches. Tim Hack, who I mentioned, Harvard Hall of Fame football and wrestling. John Hart was a head football coach at Huntley. He's in the Hall of Fame. Henkel's in the Hall of Fame at Jacobs. I've been around, at Huntley, there's a couple Hall of Fame guys that are still coaching right now. So I've been fortunate to be around a lot of good people. The softball thing was something that came up in the middle of the year. And so I coached those girls that were seniors. I coached them my first year at Harvard. I was a sophomore girls coach. So they were seniors when their head softball coach was dismissed shortly after spring break. So that's the only reason why, I was interested in helping them finish that season, because I was like, man, this is brutal. You lose your head coach during the season. And I knew the girls already, or at least a lot of them. So that was a fun deal. That was actually my first regional championship team was softball, we beat Dupac. I don't know if you guys have heard of Duran Pecatonica. They were a co-op softball team, and the girl that scored the winning run, Randy Blazer, a walk-off wild pitch. Her father had passed away a year to that date in a really sad situation. So we had some luck looking down on us that day. So I'll never forget that one. But the relationship piece, I think I've gotten much better at as I've gotten older. So, I think that I've been around a lot of staffs. And again, in football at Harvard, we had a great mix of youth and veteran and chemistry. And at Huntley, the football coach, there's so many football coaches. So it's hard to have, I think, chemistry when you have that many people and personalities. And so Jon did a great job with that too. So I would say the mix of people and coaches and in those sports, I think is really important. And so I definitely carry that over to basketball, but lots of things, just general administrative things I've learned from a ton of different people. I don't know that I've had or at least very many original thoughts. We always steal from people, and that I'm certainly no different from that.
All right, so let's get a little basketball-y here. We call this halftime adjustments. You mentioned earlier, you would play those teams in Rockford and you didn't know, okay, I'm switching. They're not switching. Mm-hmm. They're kind of playing aggressively, doing their thing. So now that you're using your motion, you started using your motion, what kind of things helped you in that motion to kind of counter that? And what adjustments did you make to, counter their, maybe, I guess, unpredictability, right?
Yeah.
What they're doing.
So with the 5-out stuff, obviously motion, you're going to be screening quite a bit. And we get a lot of natural screen the screener stuff out of that, which is great. There's a silly drill that we started doing that my one assistant who now is head coach at Woodstock, he's like, this is my favorite drill. And it's just 4-on-4 basically. And depending on who we're playing, we'll have the defense not switch or switch maybe in 3 positions and not 4, because it's 4-on-4, because some teams switch 1 through 4 and not 5. And so we kind of built it from there, but we used to run stuff where it was like, okay, we're running our motion, but look for the slips. And I just felt like we would never hit the slip guy because the passer has to see it. The guy who's setting the screen has to slip it and read it correctly. And then we have to pass it. And you're only open for a second and a half. So one of the big adjustments was we have a whole separate call for whether we're going to switch whether we're facing a man-to-man team that doesn't switch or does. So now when we're in our actions and where we are automatically slipping, the passer already knows, like, we don't have to wait for them to read it. And the guy who's setting the screen doesn't have to wait or wonder if he's slipping it. He's doing it no matter what. So we could be running our motion and setting screens, and all of a sudden the team is switching, and without setting it back up at the top, we're automatically in another call where we just start slipping it without having to set anything up. And that was a big thing. And so when we play a team like Rockford or like a Rockford team that does whatever they are going to do, and the kids just kind of do it on the fly, we're much better at being able to read it more naturally. Like, okay, are we screening? Are we switching? Are we not? Are we slipping? Because we practice both ways so much. So that's kind of a combination. And again, we practice both those things a lot. And so like, then when we have to combine it where it's a true read on whether we're screening or slipping, we're way better at it. So that's kind of how it, but again, that came from desperation of how do we score against these guys or Jacobs too in that category. When they had Krutwig, they were so good. So defensively. So again, that was just by happenstance because we practice both so often.
Now, are you also kind of scripting other cuts? You like determining cuts, or are you more just read it and react to what's going on? We talked to the coach of Denver, and they've been working on layering their cuts, like, a basket cut, however you want to stack it, right? To kind of have some things in there to, maybe they see what the other team's doing, or are you just letting your players kind of read and react to what's going on?
So we'll layer it in. Yep. I think depending on the opponent and depending on the time of year, we'll do like a shooting drill. Our motion is called 5. So we'll do like a 5 shooting drill where we're working on actions with 2 passers. So we're working on somebody's going to the rim, and, it's like football. Somebody's going in, somebody's going out, somebody's going to the rim, someone's going to the 3-point line, and we'll get reps at both. And we kind of build it from there. And we've actually gotten a lot better the last couple of years at flares. I think flares have really been hard to guard, especially when you just come down the floor. And there's times we just come down the floor, set one flare screen on one side of the floor and get a wide open look. I think those are hard actions to guard. And, it's funny, people are like, oh, I like that set. And I'm like, it's not a set. Like the kids are just playing because we practice it that we have smart kids. I've been fortunate to have smart kids too. So, I think we layer it in based on shooting drills and kind of who we're seeing our next opponent. And then we kind of go from there. But yeah, it's generally speaking, it's one guy's going towards the rim, of course, and one guy. Now, sometimes we mess it up and we have two guys going to the rim. And what I've gotten into the last couple of years because of our personnel is I've run a lot more double gap, triple gap stuff. I really like that. And so if two guys accidentally go to the rim, we started doing this last year. We tell the guy with the ball, like, you have to drive. There's a giant gap there that was accidentally created by two guys going to the rim. So maybe there's only one guy in that corner. Like, you have to attack that gap and either get to the rim and finish or get to the rim and kick it out, to that strong side corner guy. So again, it's always adapting and always trying to figure out how we can take advantage of what we have. And I think we'll continue with that double gap, triple gap stuff at Stevenson, because we have some kids that can attack the rim for sure.
All right, well, he said double and triple gaps, and now we're going to be best friends off the air. But to stay on topic, the second half of the show, we like to focus on a specific topic with our guests. And I know we have not focused on this topic with any other guests, but Todd and I like to do our homework and in our research, obviously you've now discussed the different jobs you've held. So kind of the second half of the show with you, we want to focus on kind of growing your career as a coach. We've talked to so many coaches about team things and basketball things, but we haven't really talked to anybody about growing your actual career. So as you said, you went from Harvard to Marengo to Huntley to Stevenson. But in that process, how did you go about deciding on the job for you? What did you use to evaluate that next job when you had a job?
Well, I used to back in the day when I was at Harvard, because I loved Harvard, but I knew I didn't want to stay there. We weren't going to move really probably closer, and I didn't want to stay there my whole career. I wanted to get closer to the Fox Valley, which is the conference that we live in, that Huntley's in. And so when the Marengo job opened, they were ready to win. They had a lot of good players, and there was just a little bit of a disconnect there at the time. You could kind of tell, but anybody who got hired at Marengo, I think, was going to win more than they had recently, for sure. So I knew the kids there. I knew the personnel. I knew they had a chance to win. And the AD, it's just building relationships with people. I think, I tried to be the same person when we are not very good than when we are pretty good. And so I think that as hard as that is to do, I think a lot of our the coaching fraternity and our assistants that we have, they know that I'm kind of the same person. And so it's easier to build relationships. I always if a team beats us, I always credit, it kind of bugs me when you read stuff in the paper. And I know everybody, gets misquoted from time to time, but like, it's okay to like tell the other guys that they did a good job. We're all trying to win here. And sometimes it's okay to acknowledge that another team played better than you, or another coach did a great job. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And so I think through building relationships, you kind of, talk to people and say, this is a good job. This isn't a good job. What's going on behind the scenes? So the Marengo one was easy. The only thing that was tricky about that was I was still teaching at Harvard at the time, and they are rivals. They have been rivals for, 100 years. And I was still coaching football at Harvard. So I wanted to make sure our head football coach, my mentor, was okay with it. So there actually was a week where we were in the quarterfinals for football and basketball started. So I was coaching football at Harvard, after school, and then going to late practice at Marengo and changing in the car colors and sports. And that was a long week, let me tell you. It was hard. And again, coaching kids in one building and then coaching against them in the other, was a little bit tricky. But that one was an easy one. And then Huntley, I told our AD at Marengo, Chad, he's like, are you going to stay? I'm like, Chad, I really, really like it here. And I meant it. I said, but if Huntley ever opens, I think that's the facilities are great. The education's great. We live in the district. I had coached and taught with a bunch of people at Harvard that lived in the district too. So I kind of saw that dynamic, and I kind of thought it was kind of cool to be in the same schedule as your kids and same building as your kids. And so last year when our oldest was a freshman, Grace, being in the same building as her was really, really cool. And I did not anticipate ever going anywhere else, or, the Stevenson was literally the only position I was going to interview for if it opened. And I didn't think that, everybody knew Pat was going to retire at some point in the near future, but I didn't really think I was going to get it. I thought I might have a chance to interview, just because if you look at it on paper, Huntley's a big school, Stevenson's a big school. we had a little bit of success. So I felt like on paper, as a right, age maybe, and at a point in my career where I had enough experience and a little bit of success. So, but at Harvard, when I stopped, I had been head coach for 3 years, and I was like, I've been a head coach for 3 years. I think that if I step back and help out at Jacobs for a year, which I did, it was great because I learned the small school to big school thing. But also, I'd already been a head coach, so no AD could be like, "Oh, I don't want to hire you. You don't have any head coaching experience." I'd already had it at the time. And when I interviewed for all those jobs, you bring your binder and you bring all these things. And then at Stevenson, I didn't do that at all because I was like, I've been a head coach long enough where I don't feel like I need to bring it. You want to look up how we did? You can, people can look up how we did, both bad and good, by the way. And so I think it also depends on where you're at in your career. I kind of didn't, rush to get my master's plus 45 really quickly either. Just, I didn't want to be overqualified, so that was a little bit fortunate that I kind of took my time on that. My wife was not pushing me to move over on the pay scale, right, with the education wise. So it's a combination of things. I had a support system of people that I've talked to about what is this job open? Is this a step up? Do you think this is a lateral move? And so I'm just really, really fortunate to have had a lot of good people to bounce ideas off of. And, it looks like this was like a grand plan, but it really wasn't. Huntley was for sure the destination. And like I said, I never would have thought that I would have left there, but Stevenson was just too prestigious and academically and athletically, and the facilities are amazing. And, the people I got a good feel for when I interviewed there, and the people have been great. I mean, I've been fortunate to be around in some really good departments, and, teaching PE and health, there's a lot of coaches in there. And so, being a multiple sport guy like I am, I like talking to the volleyball coach about how they're doing, and obviously the football coaches. We have some crossover there with athletes. So I like sports, and I like rooting for the kids wherever I am. And I've been a lot of good support to be able to kind of, maneuver this way, but that was certainly not my intention. I'm not that smart or have that much of a master plan to end up here, but I'm certainly fortunate that it worked out that way.
So you talked about kind of the background when you're getting a new job and looking at the factors at each school, admin, money, obviously depend on your family, you talk about moving over, whatever it may be. So kind of how do you go about that process, right? Of kind of finding out, because I've done a lot of interviews. I think that's a big thing of one, kind of knowing what the school is about and maybe, okay, what we need to fix and do and kind of adjust, but also knowing if it's a good situation where you can be happy personally, right? And there's not a lot of other factors that maybe are gonna kind of deter you from it. So how do you kind of go about finding out that information?
Asking people that I know that are familiar with the situation, or really the last two positions, it was the head coach. I mean, Marty Manning, who was at Huntley and became the head coach of Schaumburg, which is why Huntley opened when I was hired. He lived like 8 houses from me. So like I stopped by his house, and I think I was at that time I was jogging outside, and we talked about it, and he kind of gave me the ins and outs of it, and he was great. And then during the 2-week process with Stevenson, I talked to Pat Ambrose probably for almost 6 hours. He was awesome, and we talked about all the stuff that he had gone through in 24 years there as a head coach. And so like either people that are familiar with the situation, assistants or other coaches in their league, or the head coach themselves. So I right to the source, and I wanted to hear, obviously there's positives and negatives everywhere, and you got to weigh that. So that's it. I mean, it wasn't like a guessing game. We tried to really, and Marengo, I knew already kind of, because I knew the coaches there and I talked to him, but also we coached against them. So I was familiar with the kids and the facilities there. So straight to the source, as close as you can get to it, to try to figure out all those things, and how long is the admin been there, and are they supportive, and how much longer are they going to be there? Are they retiring in a year? All those things are factors. So I just go straight to the source and try to find out as much as I can, both good and bad.
I think that's really good advice. Go straight to the source. I think sometimes we try to do these roundabout searches of the school and what you can find on the internet, but I think that's great advice to coaches. Just go straight to the source.
And I was fortunate the sources were willing to share too, you know.
Mm-hmm. So let's dig into the actual interview part, because you kind of talked about the bringing the binder, and we've all done it. You know, Todd and I have been in interviews for head coaching jobs. We've gotten head coaching jobs. We've all done the binders and the program plans and all those things. So, you know, when you're in an interview, what are the things, you know, you want to be prepared? Maybe not the binder, but maybe the things you want to be prepared to answer. Or, you know, what are maybe an interesting question for you too is, since you've been in multiple different schools, maybe what's the toughest questions you've found good answers to?
You know, the Harvard interview was all basketball because I already taught there. So that was kind of easy, I would say. And there weren't like a bunch of people knocking down the door to interview for that position. You know what I mean? It's not traditionally a basketball powerhouse. So I was fortunate in that regard. Excuse me. Again, Marengo was all basketball because it wasn't a teaching position available there, and I was teaching out of the building. Huntley was mostly basketball and only one interview. Again, looking back on it, it's kind of crazy. There's one interview, and it was mostly basketball, and I think one or two teaching questions. And that's kind of how I thought head coaching positions were determined in basketball. In football, you know, I think that's I thought that was the norm. I think that is the norm. But at Stevenson, it was teaching and coaching at the same time. And so like I think they were looking for the best fit for both, which I think is unique, but it's not surprising because the education there is, you know, they're generally considered the top public school in Illinois in terms of education. I'm not trying to offend anybody, but you know, they get nominated for that every year. And that one was totally different. That one was all teaching. And then the coaching part was more conversational with the AD. And so it wasn't like a bunch of questions necessarily, or on the marker board. So matter of fact, Harvard and Marengo were the only ones that had the marker board that I went over to, but the other two, the bigger schools, right? You'd think that would be a part of it, and they weren't. So, and at Huntley, to be honest with you, somebody else turned it down before they offered it to me. So, you know, I was fortunate in that regard too. And, you know, I don't take any, you know, I don't feel bad about that. I mean, I don't feel, you know, like, oh man, they wanted somebody else. Like, that's just the way it goes. I mean, I didn't feel bad about it. I didn't feel slighted or anything. I felt fortunate actually, because I really wanted to be there. So, in terms of the toughest questions, boy, I think that the open-ended ones about, like, for example, at Stevenson, they have, a bunch of different bullet points that they want. It's called the portrait of a graduate. And they're like, all right, pick one of these 12, I think. And they're like, pick one or two that you think are most important. And I was like reading these, and like, I'd never seen them before. And I was like, well, all these are important. Like, how am I supposed to pick one or two? So I think those ones are the hard ones, but the situational stuff and the basketball stuff, I think is pretty easy. And I just try to be myself, honestly. Like, I hadn't interviewed anywhere in 10 years. When I got hired at Stevenson. So I was out of practice and I just was myself. And honestly, the video part of it, I don't know if you guys have had to do that before. When you're applying and you got to do the video part of it, that was awful. Like, I'm surprised I even knew how to do it.
Yeah,
I was like,
I agree. It's terrible.
Video?
It's awful.
It's so hard. And I was like, man, this is tough. You got to answer these questions and you don't know what they are. And, you know, you're like, you know, on Zoom, like, what is this? What's in the background of my house? Like, do I want them to see what is behind me? And so, you know, that part was, I had never experienced that either. So I think it's way harder nowadays to interview just for teaching in general than it used to be.
A quick follow is, maybe what are the questions you ask at an interview?
So that's a good question, I think. First of all, if I talk to the head coaches, I want to know, are any of your assistants applying for the job? Because if they're not, that kind of tells you something. You know, usually in a successful program place, people want to be the head coach, generally speaking. Now, some assistants are perfectly happy being assistants, but that's one of them. I usually ask about the timeline in terms of what's next. One of the things I said at Huntley specifically, I kind of flipped this on them a little bit. And I meant it, by the way. This wasn't just a line. I asked them, I'm like, do you guys feel the passion I have for this position? And do you understand how badly I want to be here? So that's telling them how badly you want the job, but also asking a question at the same time. I thought that was always, you know, I did that there. And I felt like that was a good thing to, you know, if you really mean it. I thought that was a good thing to add in there. What else? I don't ever talk about the years. I've never talked about, well, how many years are you going to give me in terms of teaching or the money? I've never talked about that. It's never been important. I just always trust that HR is going to treat me like anybody else and do whatever they normally do. So I've never asked about that. I don't think it's appropriate to ask that. Some people do. But I would say generally the timeline for sure. Other than that, I pretty much know the other things I wanted to know based on, before I get in there, based on the resources, whether it's other coaches or the head coach of the program, by that point.
So let's talk about the hard thing of going from your previous job to a new job and having those conversations with your players and maybe even the admin and, letting them know, because that can be hard. You've been in place for a while, you've had some success, you've built relationships with people. So what are the kind of things you want to get across in those conversations, before you move on to your next spot?
Yeah, they are hard. I would say I want to tell the kids, or I always tell the kids that they're going to be fine. They're going to be successful. We won some games because of them, not because of me or the coaching staff. And so they'll be just fine. Like, you guys are going to win games. Like, you'll be fine. Just keep working hard. And I always tell them, and this is true, the relationship hasn't ended. It's just different. I'll still write letters of recommendation for you. I'll still be there for you if you need me. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm just not the head coach anymore. So here. And so I think that that's really important for the kids to hear, and it's true in my case, by the way. So I think those are two of the main points. The Marengo one was different because it had already kind of gotten out that I was going to Huntley, and then the Huntley one was different because no one knew, and that happened so fast. If you can believe that, like, I applied and was offered the job and had 3 interviews within 2 weeks. And to the day, I mean, nothing in education happens that quickly, right? You guys know that. So that was kind of better that they didn't find out, but harder because they hadn't found out. It was a total surprise. So, I would say those two things. You're going to be fine. Keep working hard. You guys are why we're been successful. And also, the relationship's not going to end. I'm just not the head coach anymore.
All right. So as we move into our last 2 segments, the first one we call 30-second timeout. It's your opportunity to talk about anything you'd like, your family, your program, something you want our listeners to know about, any topic you want to discuss. You could ask Todd and I a question. It's kind of a rough 30 seconds. There's no referee telling you your timeout's over.
Yeah.
So the floor is yours.
I would just say, in general, I've gotten better at showing appreciation. I would encourage head coaches to show appreciation in general to your kids. Like, I thank our kids for coming to open gym because we go in the morning before school. I thank our assistant coaches. I try to do little things for them here and there, and gift cards and those things, and appreciate your family and spouse, especially because it is long, as we all know, during basketball season. I think I've gotten a lot better at just showing appreciation for people in general, and sincere appreciation, by the way. So I think that that's something that sometimes we forget or take for granted as head coaches because we're so wrapped up in our own stuff. But taking a step back and appreciating everybody that's allowing you to do this. We all want to do this to the best of our ability, and it takes time. So in order to do that, we need a lot of people on our side, and players and coaches and family are at the top of that list. So I would just encourage people to kind of show that every once in a while and keep that in mind.
All right, let's get into quick hitters, fun questions. Answer in any way you feel like it. First one, favorite type of ice cream?
Oh, anything with chocolate and peanut butter mix. That's my favorite combination. So whatever that entails, I'm all over that for sure.
All right. Weirdest defense you've ever coached against?
I think it was during COVID. I'm not 100% sure on that, but Carey had they would start in a 2-3 for about 2 passes and then flip to man. And that's when I kind of realized that the Carey head coach was a big Michigan fan, because Michigan kind of has done that under Juwan Howard a little bit. And so then I knew that he had stolen a couple sets specifically from Michigan. So then I kind of knew that's what he was doing. But that was a goofy one. You know, it kind of takes you out of rhythm. You call something for the zone, and then all of a sudden you're going into man. And after a couple of passes, it just kept us out of rhythm. So I would say that was probably the goofiest one. Yeah, we've seen some junk defenses, but that was, you know, we recognized it. Our staff did a good job recognizing it right away at probably the second possession, but it was just hard to deal with, even though you knew it was there.
That's my jam right there. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. I like a coach you feel is underrated. I'm sure there's many, but maybe a couple coaches you feel that are underrated.
If you're talking college, it's funny, the older you get and the more you've done, you know, I've gone into coaching, you kind of, maybe you like some people that you didn't like initially, and you understand kind of coaching a little bit differently. I think Matt Painter does a great job. I know that they ut upset last year. I know he's had a couple of short tournament runs, but every time I listen to that guy speak and hear him I'm a big press conference guy. Like, I love reading quotes and listening to coaches after games. And I used to listen to Thibodeau all the time. Like, he was great. I just wanted to hear what he said. And so I would say Matt Painter, probably, only because, you know, they've had it, you know, he's taken some heat for some of the early exits recently with how good a regular season they've had. But I've always been an Izzo guy. I love Izzo. He was kind of how I got into college basketball. I love that Michigan State team in 2000. Mateen Cleaves was my favorite. Yeah, that was my favorite player. I love Mateen Cleaves. So that was when I really started watching more college basketball.
That's at some point I will show you what I have on my wall to represent that team. If you weren't a coach, you would be.
If I didn't have to go through all the schooling, a lawyer, because I really do enjoy debating and talking, but I don't know that I could get through all the reading and the education part of it. But yeah, I love like lawyer movies and lawyer shows. And so I would say probably a lawyer if I could get through the education.
If you could coach any professional team, who would it be?
Cubs.
Basketball, Cubs. There you go.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
All right. And finally, craziest thing about working at a school with over 4,000 kids. So
it's funny because at Huntley we had 3,000 kids, but the building was smaller. Stevenson's enormous, and we have 4,500 kids. I don't know if it's crazy, but like seeing one of our guys is kind of like a pleasant surprise throughout the day. Just passing them in the hall, I'm like, hey. And then there's certain kids, you guys know this, certain kids you see every day and certain kids you never see. So whenever I see, like, it doesn't even have to be a basketball kid, a kid that I know and that I have in class, is kind of like a pleasant surprise as I'm walking the hallways from class to class. So yeah, but the hallways are just as jammed at Huntley as they were at Stevenson. It's just a bigger building.
I say that all the time. I went to Downer South and there was 3,000 kids, and they're like, oh, do you know so-and-so? I probably saw them every day, but I mean, if I saw their face, maybe, but I don't, you don't know all those kids. So
totally.
It's crazy. Well, Coach, we can't thank you enough for joining us this morning. Awesome stuff. I think it was a unique perspective and kind of some stuff we haven't talked about before. And definitely can get you back on and pick your brain on the motion and all that stuff too.
Yeah, my pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast in partnership with the IBCA. Please be sure to rate us on whatever platform you are listening and give us a 5-star rating. For more show content and updates, please follow us on Twitter at After the Timeout. As always, thank you for listening. Tune in next time for more content on the court, off the court, and anything in between.